Hi, and welcome to the final episode of This Old Garden Animal Edition. Today we're going to be taking a look at fish facts before we take a look at our garden updates and talk about where we'll be going with our updates from here.
Let's start off by defining fish. Fish are a group of vertebrates, again that means that they have a skeleton inside of them, that live in water, have tails, and breathe using gills. Most but not all fish are cold-blooded, so their temperature is determined from their environment. And again, most but not all fish have fins. They all live in fresh or salt water. There are a variety of adaptations that fish have that allow them to live in either water condition, but they all are going to be able to breathe the air that is dissolved in the water around them. Fish. Let's get some facts. One of the most important things to understand is that fish need oxygen just like people do, but they don't get their oxygen from the air most of the time. They have gills that help them to breathe the oxygen that's dissolved in the water. Now, this doesn't mean that they're breathing water. A lot of people get this confused. What it means is that there are oxygen molecules in between the water molecules, and as the fish take in water through their mouth and push it out through their gills are able to scrape the oxygen molecules away from the water molecules and use that to process just like we do in our lungs, except they're using their gills to get the oxygen. It's not that they're breathing water. Just like we talked about with birds, reptiles, and amphibians, almost all fish hatch from eggs. There's only a couple types of fish that do not hatch from eggs. Guppies and a few sharks don't hatch from eggs, and they're born live like mammals, but almost all fish hatch from eggs. Fun fact about fish is that they do not have eyelids, so they can't close their eyes when they sleep, and it also means that they don't blink like we do. Fish and fish products are a very common food, and fish can be very healthy to eat. Most people cook their fish, although some people eat certain kinds of fish raw, and that's called sushi. Also, some people eat fish eggs, and that's called caviar. Let's go ahead and clarify what isn't a fish in the ocean before we get into some specific fish facts. Jellyfish, starfish, and crayfish are not fish at all. Unlike real fish, they don't have backbones, gills, or fins. This means that they don't fall into the vertebrate category and cannot be categorized as fish. Most baby fish are called fry. A baby shark or stingray is called a pup. In the picture above, that's a shark, so that's going to be a pup and not fry. Speaking of stingrays, here's one now. A stingray doesn't look much like a fish, but it is one. It has a wide, flat body. Most stingrays flap their fins and fly through the water, sort of like how a bird flies through the air. The largest fish that's ever lived on Earth was the megalodon shark. It looked like a great white shark, but was much bigger. It could grow over 60 feet long. That's even longer than a school bus. It has been extinct for millions of years though, so no one's ever actually seen one, but we have seen the fossils, so we know that they existed. The largest fish on Earth today is the whale shark. It can grow up to 50 feet long, which is considerably smaller than the megalodon. Also, whale sharks are no threat to humans, so if you were to come across one in the ocean, you'd be completely safe even though they're so big. Another fun shark fact is that their bones are actually made out of cartilage, so that's like the material that makes up your nose. It's a little bit softer than bone, but still solid enough to have them be a vertebrate, which means that they do have a skeleton. An eel is a type of fish that looks a little bit like a snake. It doesn't have fins that are as noticeable as other fish. It can also make an electric shock and kill other sea creatures, or at least incapacitate them in this way so that they can either escape danger or eat them as a meal. The fastest fish in the world is the sailfish. It can swim over 65 miles per hour or 110 kilometers per hour. That's as fast as cars drive on the highway, and faster than most boats are traveling in the water, which means that if you encountered one of these in the wild, it could easily pass you by. Just a reminder, whales and dolphins are not fish. Even though they live in the ocean where other fish live, they're actually mammals and breathe air, not water, just like we talked about in the last episode. Speaking of animals that are not fish, let's go ahead and revisit all the other types of animals that we've visited so far across this series, just as a little review. First up, birds. A bird is an animal that has feathers. It's warm-blooded, hatches from an egg, and has a backbone. It has a beak, 2 legs, and 2 wings. Remember, there are no 4-legged birds anywhere in the world. Next up, insects. An insect is a small animal with 6 legs. Its body is divided into 3 main parts: head, thorax, and abdomen. An insect has a hard outer covering called an exoskeleton. Most insects have wings and a pair of antennae. A spider is a silk-spinning animal with 8 legs. Its body is divided into 2 main parts: abdomen and cephalothorax. That just means that the head and the thorax are all one part, like we talked about briefly when we covered insects before. But remember, spiders are not insects. A spider also has a hard protective covering on its body, kind of like an insect. Most spiders have 8 eyes. Now on to a predator of insects, reptiles. A reptile is an animal that has dry, rough, scaly skin. It has lungs for breathing. A reptile is cold-blooded and has a backbone. Most reptiles hatch from eggs. On to an animal that most people talk about when they talk about reptiles, and that's an amphibian. Remember, amphibians are different from reptiles though. An amphibian is an animal that usually lives part of its life in water and part of its life on land, and it goes through metamorphosis between those phases of its life. It is cold-blooded and has a backbone. Most amphibians have smooth, moist skin and no scales. This is usually how you can tell them apart pretty easily from reptiles. Also, just like birds, reptiles, and the fish that we're talking about today, amphibians hatch from eggs. And then back to mammals. A mammal is an animal whose babies are fed with milk from the mother's body. It has a backbone and a well-developed brain. A mammal has fur or hair, and it is warm-blooded. Remember, not only animals in the wild are mammals, but so are you and I. And that brings us back to fish. A fish is an animal that lives in water and breathes through gills. It has a backbone. Most fish have fins, are covered with scales, and are cold-blooded. Now let's go to this week's special visitor. It's not a human, but instead it's a xerophale, our class fish.
Here is a look at our class fish. This is the fish that was in our classroom before we went on the closure and started our distance learning from home. And she is a beta. Now, betas are interesting fish because the males can't go in together because they will fight, but the females are okay in groups most of the time. Additionally, betas have a special organ that allows them to breathe air for a short period of time outside of water, which means that betas sometimes go to the surface to breathe, or if they are out of water for a little bit, they can continue to survive, so they don't just breathe with gills. That makes them pretty special, as only a few species of fish are capable of doing that. You can see that she spends a lot of time going up and down there, and she does come to the surface to breathe pretty regularly in her tank. I think right now she's looking for food. It's not really her feeding time though, and it's really important to not overfeed fish. So I'm not going to give her any food right now. But she is giving you a good look at her. If you look closely, you can see all the parts of the fish that we talked about before. See the fins and the scales. Look closely on the sides by the side fins, right near the front there. And you can see the gill slits. And oh, she's given us a look at her opening her mouth there. All right, well, I don't want to bother her too much, so we're going to go ahead and leave her be. And I think this is a good time for us to go ahead and head outside and look at some plant updates. Taking a look at the blueberry bushes, we can see that the berries are really starting to blue up. You can see some of them are green, but a lot of them are starting to get that purple-blue color. And pretty soon, they are going to be ready to eat. I'm looking forward to it, and then it's just going to be a race against the birds. Here are the butterfly bushes that we looked at before, and you can see that the blossoms are starting to form up here, and pretty soon these will be opened into nice bright orange flowers. Here you can see the cone flowers getting ready to open up. You can see the first little petals really forming up around the central cone area there, and pretty soon these will be all opened up and brightly colored. If we look down through the middle here, we can see the color starting to come out on the petals just a little bit. So by next week, I think that we are really going to be seeing some color all around the garden, and especially on this plant. The elephant ears continue to get bigger. You can see next to my hand that this leaf is much bigger than what we looked at last week, and they are going to continue getting bigger yet. So again, we'll keep watching this over the coming weeks and see just exactly how big they get. The bee balm is about 3 times as tall as the last time that we looked at it, and it's really starting to get into a position to put out flowers. I would say that we should see blooms here in the next 2 weeks or so. Here's the cold hardy hibiscus that I was talking about last time with the different colored leaves. And you can see that it's much bigger and has a lot more stalks coming out. So a lot of progress this week. Things are really growing strong now, and we'll be able to see a lot of differences every week as we continue to watch. Here's a little crepe myrtle that we've been watching. You can see that there's some nice deep color foliage coming out on it, and the branches that were there are really full up with leaves now. So now it'll be up to the new branches to fill out across the season. The maroon colored Asiatic lilies have put out their bloom pods here, and that means that we should be seeing some blossoms really start to surge out here soon and start to get some color on these in the next couple weeks. The dianthus here by the pond have started to fade back a little bit. As you can see here, a lot of the blossoms have started to pull back, and that means that it's going to be time for this to just be leafy and green here for a while. But almost always this will flower a second and every once in a while a third time across the season. Here you can see most of the pansies are still doing well. The crepe myrtle in the middle there has started to leaf out a good bit more. And you can see the petunias on either side there that were planted before coming in strong. The little petunias that I planted are still a little bit hard to see, and a squirrel came through and dug up a few of them, so I might have to look at replacing those. But the pansies are looking good, the bigger petunias are looking good, and then the coneflowers are really starting to fill in the back. If you look at the green sections in the back, you can see that there's a lot of coneflowers coming up across the back, and we talked about that before. So there will be plenty of color here across the season. It's just a matter of whether it will be all the petunias that I had planted before, or if they need replacing, and then of course the coneflowers as they get bigger. Here's the larger crepe myrtle at the corner of my driveway and sidewalk. You can see that it's really filled in nicely across the last week, and now it's just a matter of smaller branches starting to fill in, just like with the smaller ones, except this one is going to be filling upward a lot more, and probably filling in on the interior where there were previously not as many leaves. You can still see through the middle here just a little bit, but you can also see smaller branches that are going to fill in a lot across the season. Here's the crepe myrtle that I have groomed into a shrub instead of a tree at the moment, and you can see that since the last time we looked at it, it's really filled in all over the place. The last time there were only leaves really through the back there, but now the whole thing is a whole lot more full, and I'm starting to see a lot of new growth. So I look to see a lot of upward mobility in this one, and a lot of new leaves, and then of course later in the season some really nice flowers. This one happens to be purple, whereas the ones on the other side are red and white. It's been a couple weeks since we looked at the hydrangeas, but you can see that it's starting to put out the first stages of its blossoms here, so we will be having flowers soon. These are pretty interesting, so I definitely will be checking back in on these and showing you how these are kind of unique compared to the other flowers in my gardens. Here you can see that the dianthus that's in the pot with the balloon flowers has started to open up. You can see that the flowers are different than the ones by the pond, and that they are much bigger. Similar in color, but definitely a bigger bloom. Here's a look at the lemon fluff that we've been watching, and you can see that the bloom pods are really up, and some of them are getting very close to opening. If we look at this one here, I'll pull it into the frame so that you can see it. It's really getting close to opening there. I expect to have some good color on these probably in the next week or so, and then the rest of them should follow quickly thereafter. There's not color on this for a long time, but it is great color, so I can't wait for you to see it. Here you can see the hostas growing underneath the deck. The one over here is the one that was originally all pale and covered by the tarp, and then you can see the matching one over there that we've been comparing it to, and they are now perfectly matched in color and almost in size. So they are growing strong and looking good. Looking at the ornamental grasses, you can see that they are almost as tall as my fence now. That's a 6-foot fence, so they are currently getting close to their maximum height and looking nice and strong heading into the sunny season. There's a lot of growth going on in my backyard corner garden here. Plants that we've been tracking, and then some plants that are coming up fresh. So you can see the bloom pods all over the top of the tiny dino there. They are really getting close to being ready to open there, so we're going to see some great color there soon. We have the grasses that we saw originally much shorter and cut off. We have some new bulbs that were planted there. And then a bulb that's returning from last year. We have an elephant ear coming up there, and then growth on the crepe myrtle in the center back of the picture there, backed up by some ornamental grasses. And then just in front are the irises that we looked at earlier in the year. Now they are out of bloom, they won't bloom again, and they are just storing up energy to come back again next year. So we'll be keeping an eye on this and should have some good developments on the new bulbs, the old bulbs, and everything in between back here in this garden in the coming weeks. Taking a look at the volunteer tomatoes, they are looking great for the most part, really establishing well. And then also, if we look right here, that is actually a pepper plant that I found. I'm hoping to find maybe another one of those as the seeds are continuing to come up in all of the pots that I use the soil in. But they're looking good, which means that I'll have fresh tomatoes and peppers this season. The basil plants are looking good. They have over doubled in size since the last time that we looked at them. They are coming in strong and setting up new leaves, which means that they are well on their way to growing up and being able to be harvested to seasoned dishes and some drinks like lemonade. As I said earlier, basil lemonade is one of my favorites. And in just a second, I'm going to take you to look at a new plant that I have that will go well with that lemonade as well. Here we have a plant that we haven't talked about yet, and this is lavender. This is another herb, and it smells really good. It's great in terms of using it to flavor dishes, but also it's great in lemonade. So some basil lavender lemonade is one of my favorites. It might not be everybody's taste, but I think it's great. If you look closely in this pot, you will see the smaller petunias that I planted earlier. They are establishing pretty well and coming in strong. Looks like all but maybe one of them has survived and is looking good, so we'll have some more flowers here soon. And here's a look at the larger petunias that I had put in before. You can see this one's getting ready to bloom here. The blossom's going to open up. This one is getting ready as well, so we'll get to see what colors we have here because they're all mixed up, but they are looking good and ready to show us their colors anytime now. Here you can see the stone crop is looking good and growing like crazy. It will soon fill in this area, and I might actually have to prune it back just a little bit to keep it contained, but that's a good thing because that means it's doing exactly what it was supposed to when I planted it here a few weeks ago, and really looking good for filling in this entire space by the end of this growing season. Here you can see the progress on the cold hardy hibiscus that started coming up first, the first one that we talked about this year. And that is about 1.5 to 2 feet tall solidly now. Some of them are kind of wandering toward 2.5 feet tall. They will get about 4 or 5 feet tall usually by the time that they are finished growing and by the time that they start putting out flowers. So they're about halfway to the height where I expect to start seeing flowers on them, and we'll keep tracking their progress until we get to that point. So let's take a look at the bananas. I'm standing here this time so that you can start to see how tall they are. I'm about 6'3", and so you can see that the leaves are starting to stretch above me. Now, the main stalk here, the main trunk stem, is a little bit shorter than me, closer to about 5 feet or so. But the leaves will continue to reach up, and this tree does usually top out right around my height. So we'll continue to see them fill in, and then these shorter guys, they should be getting up taller, closer to the height of this one as well as we go across the season. So you'll get to see that in the coming weeks as well. Here you can see what was the single banana. It's getting much, much bigger. The stalk now is about 3.5 feet tall, and then the smaller ones are getting up closer to about 1 foot tall now. So a lot of good progress here. A look at the smallest banana tree shows us that even that one's taking off this year. It's almost 2 feet tall now at the stem or the trunk area, and then reaching toward 3 feet with the leaf coming up out of the middle there. And then just behind it, if you look back there, you can see there's the cold hardy hibiscus and then a couple lilies coming up behind that. So a lot of good growth here, and getting close to time for some good color on some more of these flowers. Looking forward to showing you that soon. Thanks for joining me again on This Old Garden Animal Edition. This will be our last video lesson of the year. I hope that you have had a good time learning about plants and animals across this video series. Now, just because this is the last video lesson of the year doesn't mean that I'm going to stop the plant updates. I'm going to go ahead and continue doing plant updates across the summer so that you can continue to see the plants that we've been watching as they've developed, as many of them haven't quite opened yet, and I want you to have a chance to see them. Now, I can't tell you that it will be a regular, like every Tuesday sort of thing like it has been, but what I will do is when there's a good development, I will go ahead and get that posted for you so that you can continue to see what the plants are looking like if you've been following us all across the season, or even if you're joining in now and want to see what's going on. So that's it for now. I will see you next time, and also that means it's time for Ella to say goodbye. Say goodbye, Ella.